Before everything unraveled, my life followed a familiar, comfortable routine. I never could have imagined my entire world flipping upside down the way it did. Work was steady, relationships seemed solid, and I honestly believed that if I worked hard, stayed true to myself, and kept my focus, life would just fall into place. But soon enough, I found out how little control I actually had over the things that mattered most. Looking back now, I wonder if there were warning signs I missed. In hindsight, those subtle moments of doubt or discomfort were there, but I brushed them aside, trusting the people in my life. I ignored the inconsistencies because I was focused on keeping the peace. My loyalty turned out to be my greatest weakness. When my therapist recommended that I start writing down my experiences, she said it was crucial to let out the anger I had been bottling up. She believed that unless I confronted the pain from the betrayal, I'd never be able to truly heal. Even now, closure feels like a distant dream, and the answers I'm seeking seem impossible to reach. She urges me to reframe my view on things, hoping I'll reconnect with who I am beneath all the hurt. But honestly, I'm not sure I know that person anymore. Maybe that's part of the problem. My name's James Carson. I'm 34 years old, and I used to work as a project manager at a company that specialized in designing industrial equipment. It was a family-owned business, so I knew from the start that I wouldn't rise too far up the ladder because, well, I wasn't part of the family. The story I'm about to tell you is what led me to leave that job and walk away from the life I thought I knew. People say I'm one of the good guys, hardworking, with a decent sense of humor. I took my responsibilities seriously, especially when it came to my marriage. But it seemed I was the only one putting in the effort. In high school, I worked hard, but I was never a straight-A student. Still, I got by through dedication and sheer willpower. I wasn't the type to win over girls easily, but I treated people with respect, and that included taking rejection gracefully. I dropped out of school before graduating and began working as an apprentice at the firm, while simultaneously studying mechanical engineering at the local community college. I've always loved building things. Whether it was assembling blocks as a kid or now designing intricate machines on a computer. My friends joked about how obsessed I was with gadgets. I even wore a small camera to a party once, which turned out to be far more useful than I ever expected. At the end of my first year in college, my best friend, Mark, convinced me to attend a party where nursing students hung out. I wasn't really interested, but the live music sounded good, so I went along. That night, Mark's friend introduced us to some girls, and I was surprised when one of them, named Emily, took an interest in me. We danced, laughed, and she asked to meet again. I agreed, not realizing at the time just how naive I was. Emily was different from anyone I had met before. We started dating, and she brought emotions out of me I hadn't felt in years. She was smart, driven, and every time we were apart, I found myself missing her. My parents teased me about how taken I was with her, but they could see how happy she made me. I worked even harder to prove myself to her, to show her that I was someone she could count on and maybe even fall in love with. We talked about the future, but there was one topic we never fully agreed on: children. Emily was committed to her nursing career, and she worried that having kids would get in the way. I thought children could enrich our lives, but she was firm in her decision. My parents, especially my mom who adored Emily, told me to follow my heart. Emily was close to her sister, Jessica, and after her long night shifts, she'd spend several days at Jessica's place, about 2 hours away. She'd always tell me not to worry, saying I was too busy to notice her absence. Still, I always did. Eventually, I gave in and agreed to her no-kids stance, and 3 years after we met, on June 20th, 2010, we got married. Mark was my best man, and Emily's friend Rachel was her maid of honor. Emily looked incredible in her ivory dress as she walked down the aisle, smiling radiantly at me. I couldn't stop grinning. After the wedding, Emily moved into the house I had inherited from my grandparents and spent months fixing up. But that's when the disagreements started, mostly over finances. Emily insisted on keeping her own bank account, so we compromised by opening a joint one for shared expenses like bills and vacations. I didn't win that argument. Our first few years together were decent, though not without their issues. We went to her nursing class reunions, and though I felt out of place, I still made an effort. She danced with doctors, but I didn't think much of it. I became friends with some of the other husbands, and we bonded over golf. Sometimes I'd go on golf trips that overlapped with Emily's visits to her sister, which bugged her. Emily, however, never seemed very interested in moving up in her career. She didn't want the extra responsibility of promotions and was content with her position. As we neared our 10th anniversary, I wanted to do something special. I spoke to Rachel about planning a surprise hotel getaway for dinner and dancing, and she promised to keep it under wraps. A few days before the event, I told Emily, and she was thrilled. That night, everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. At the hotel, Emily spent most of the evening with Rachel, and I was chatting with another guy about golf. Later, at the nightclub, she danced with me most of the time. But at one point, as we were dancing, a man tapped my shoulder. Before I knew it, Emily was in his arms, looking at him with a joy I had never seen before. Stunned, I walked back to the table and Rachel, with a sly smile, said, "James, isn't it great that you let Emily dance with her first love?" Apparently, he was supposed to show up at our wedding but didn't. My heart sank. I demanded to know what was going on, but everyone avoided my gaze except Rachel, who seemed pleased with herself. Emily pulled me aside and told me the truth. The man she had been dancing with was Luke Heller, her first and only love. She explained that they had dated before we met and had stayed in touch over the years. She didn't love me, not in the way she loved him. That's why she never wanted kids with me. Now that Luke was back, she was leaving me for him. In that moment, my entire world shattered. I felt my stomach turn, and before I knew it, I threw up right there in front of everyone. As Luke started walking toward us, something inside me snapped. I screamed at Emily, calling her every name I could think of, and demanded she hand over her wedding and engagement rings. Everyone else just stood there, stunned by my sudden outburst. When Luke got closer, I warned him to back off or I'd make sure he wouldn't be able to use his hands again. I turned on everyone at the table, accusing them of enjoying watching me get humiliated like this. My anger was blinding. I looked back at Emily, completely livid, and demanded the rings again. Realizing how out of control the situation had become, she handed them over. I stormed up to our hotel room, grabbed my things, and threw all her clothes in the trash. In a fit of rage, I even urinated on them before I left. On my way out, I handed the key card to the receptionist, telling her that Emily would be the one paying the bill. Looking back, I do regret not apologizing for making a mess in the lobby, but I doubt I'll ever step foot in that hotel again. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember most of it, just the anger boiling inside me. Once I got home, I took a deep breath and realized I needed to take action. I disconnected the garage door opener, grabbed a few trash bags, and headed straight to the bedroom. I cleared out all of Emily's clothes from the closets and drawers, tossing everything into the bags. While doing so, I found 2 keys, one for a small vault we had, and another for a safety deposit box. I rifled through her jewelry and papers, looking for anything suspicious. Nothing stood out at first, but the anger kept me up. By 2 a.m., I still couldn't sleep, so I searched online and tracked down the storage facility she used. I grabbed gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints and drove over there. What I found inside ripped me apart. I took photos of everything. I picked the locks on 2 cabinets. One was filled with Emily's secret plans, things I never thought she was capable of, and the other contained detailed files on Luke Heller. It confirmed every suspicion I had about him being a manipulative, selfish prick. I returned home, bought new locks, and changed them before heading to the bank. Inside the safety deposit box, I found bonds in Emily's name. I snapped photos of everything, wondering where she got the money. Not long after, Emily texted me, asking to pick up her car. I responded, reminding her that the car was in my name, and I'd be driving it until the lease expired. I warned her not to bring Luke along and threatened to burn her clothes if she didn't want them. Her sister, Jessica, called me, hurling insults, so I blocked her number without a second thought. Though I hadn't planned on it, later that night, I burned Emily's wedding dress in the fireplace. I watched as it turned to ashes, just like our marriage. An hour later, Emily showed up with Rachel and her husband, David. David quietly asked me how I was doing. I laughed bitterly and said, "What do you think? I'm furious at all of you, for covering up for her, and at myself for being such a fool." Emily looked annoyed when I called her out. as if she expected me to just move on. James, I know you're hurting, but this isn't you. You ruined the clothes I was going to take to Luke, she added. I'll pack my things and leave you alone. I've always loved Luke, and you deserve someone who will love you and give you the family you want. I did enjoy our time together, but if Luke hadn't come back, I might have stayed. Then she had the nerve to ask for her wedding ring back, as a reminder of the good times. I shouted, "No, that ring's been in my family for generations. My mother cherished it, and you were supposed to be the one. I haven't even told my parents yet about your betrayal." Emily winced at my anger as she packed up her things with Rachel and David's help. She asked about her wedding dress. I pointed to the fireplace and said, "Check the ashes." When she saw what I had done, she burst into tears. Rachel called me a jerk, but I fired back. She's not wearing that dress for him now, is she? Those are the ashes of our marriage. David kept his mouth shut, visibly uncomfortable. Emily asked if she could check to make sure I hadn't missed anything, and I let her. While she was looking, I told David, "We won't be golfing together anymore." He nodded silently, knowing this was the end. Emily returned, speaking softly, "I'm sorry, James, but I've always loved Luke. You'll find someone who will truly love you and give you the family you want. This is for the best, even though it hurts." They left, and I collapsed onto the bed, utterly exhausted. Later that night, my mom called, accusing me of hitting Emily. Apparently, Emily had shown her pictures of supposed bruises. "Mom, she's lying," I said, my voice heavy with frustration. "She's been having an affair with Luke for years, and now she's trying to take everything. I've never laid a hand on her, or any woman for that matter. You can believe her if you want, but if you do, you'll lose me forever." I hung up, knowing the battle was just beginning. After dinner, I returned home, determined to organize all the evidence I had gathered. I started tracing the money trail. Checking our joint account revealed even more secrets. Emily's password book proved to be incredibly useful, and I spent the rest of that night and Sunday sorting through everything and locking her out of every account. "I've been played," I muttered, pacing the floor. Every time she claimed to visit her sister, I was either away for work or off on some trip with friends I thought I could trust. The realization hit me hard. She had been cheating on me all along. On Monday morning, I got to the office early to check my leave balance. Sandra from HR noticed something was off and asked, "James, are you okay?" Her voice was filled with concern. "My world blew up on Friday, our anniversary. She set it all up so her lover could take her right in front of me," I explained, my voice tight with anger. "She's been seeing him for over a decade, and now they're trying to destroy me." Sandra hugged me, whispering, "I'm so sorry. I know you'd never hurt anyone. Call me if you need anything," Sandra said, offering a sympathetic smile before walking back to her desk. As I returned to mine, my boss called me into his office. "Emily came by with pictures of you supposedly abusing her," he said, his tone dripping with accusation. I stared at him, incredulous. "Do you honestly believe that liar over me? If you do, then fire me. Otherwise, I'll quit. I've got 9 weeks of leave due." He was taken aback by my defiance, but I didn't care anymore. I resigned on the spot, sending my letter through the internal system before walking out. Later, while digging through more financial records, I found proof that Emily had been staying at a hotel 3 hours away, under the guise of visiting her sister. Furious, I packed my things and drove to that hotel, the drive feeling even sweeter knowing it would bother her. Once there, I asked to speak with the manager, though I knew it was a long shot to get any information without a court order. The manager, unsurprisingly, couldn't help me. But after he left, the receptionist leaned in and whispered, "I know the couple you're talking about. They've been here plenty of times. That guy's an arrogant jerk. I used to be friends with the woman he stalked, and he forced her to sell everything to pay his debts. I can put you in touch with her lawyer. She's a tough one and could help you get a court order." I nodded, thankful. I appreciate it. If Emily had just left quietly, I wouldn't have done anything, but they're trying to destroy my life. They've picked the wrong person to mess with. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in an office with Heather Larson, a no-nonsense attorney who listened intently as I laid out everything. "Do you have proof?" she asked. Yes, it's all on my phone, camera, and organized on my laptop, I replied. Heather smiled. Meet me tomorrow at 7:30 a.m., and we'll review everything before heading to court at 8:30. I think we can get a warrant for the hotel tapes. If this guy has scammed others, it'll work in our favor, I added. He usually uses the same hotel chain. He's already conned at least 3 other women. Her eyes hardened. I'll be your lawyer if you want. That sleazebag won't know what hit him. The next morning, I met Heather again, along with Jim, the father of one of Luke Heller's victims, and a private investigator. I handed over an SD card with all the evidence, including files on another victim named Christine. Jim, clearly angry, muttered, "The world would be better off without him." At the courthouse, Heather spoke with a clerk, which seemed unusual, but before long, a man approached, ordering the clerk to stop the sale of Christine's house. He handed Heather a warrant for all hotels in the chain and warned the hotel manager, Marv, to cooperate or face jail time. When we arrived at the hotel, Marv hesitated, but Heather's commanding presence forced him to comply. Security input the dates Emily claimed to visit her sister, and soon, Mr. and Mrs. Heller popped up on the records. We quickly found video evidence of Emily and Luke dining together and entering their room. Even more damning, there were 26 additional reservations at various hotels across the chain, although footage older than 18 months was unavailable. Heather was pleased, jotting everything down. The manager promised to send over all the videos and paperwork. Back at her office, she laid out the strategy. We need them to initiate the divorce. If you file for infidelity now, they'll retaliate by using those fake photos against you. Let them file first, and we'll tear apart their case with the evidence we've gathered. Jim was still working on tracking down more of Luke's victims, while Heather focused on using the hotel videos to demolish Emily's credibility. Her team would handle the finances and legal details. Exhausted, I sighed. I need a break. I want to fight, but I'm just so tired. Heather nodded. Take a few weeks off. You've earned it. But once you're ready, someone will hire you. Even with these false accusations hanging over your head. Oddly enough, finding out that Luke had conned other women brought me some small comfort. I wasn't the only fool. Collecting all the proof helped me regain a sense of control, even though I was still consumed by anger every time I thought about that night. I took some time off, heading south to ride roller coasters to shake off the stress. Afterward, I made my way up north, driving along the coast to clear my mind. The scenery provided a temporary distraction from the betrayal, though the pain was always lurking beneath the surface. When I returned home, I was surprised to find my lawn perfectly trimmed. My neighbor, Greg, waved as I pulled into the driveway. "Look who's back. The wanderer returns," he joked. "Sandra was worried about you," he continued. "She and some others helped tidy up the yard. Oh, and some officials were looking for you, so expect a visit soon." I thanked him and promised to stop by for a beer. Over the next few weeks, Sandra and I kept in touch. She never brought up Emily's lies, just listened when I needed to vent. I was grateful for that. One evening, as Greg and I were chatting in the front yard, a court messenger arrived with divorce papers in hand. He smirked as he handed them over, but I smiled back, unfazed. "I hope the judge hates liars as much as I do," I said. I immediately called Heather and sent her the documents. "Don't worry, James," she reassured me. "We've got this." 7 weeks later, I found myself waiting outside the courtroom with Heather for the divorce hearing to begin. Jim was there, too, looking happier than I'd seen him before. He gave me a big hug as I walked in, and I sat down next to Heather and Jim, with a few supportive friends behind me, Greg, Bill, Sandra, and my brother Dan. Dan couldn't be there, as he had work, but he'd been supportive from afar, despite the falling out with our parents, who still believed Emily's lies over me. On the other side of the courtroom, Emily sat with Luke by her side, looking defiant. Her co-workers Rachel and Amy were there, too, but Luke's smug confidence began to falter when he saw Heather and Jim walk in with me. Meanwhile, my parents sat behind Emily, showing their support for her. I ignored their glares and Emily's occasional glances my way. Bill leaned in quietly, muttering, "She's just a well-dressed cheat," which probably earned some side eyes from Emily and Rachel. Emily's lawyer, Ms. Bradford, stood up confidently, stating that Emily admitted to infidelity, but only after enduring emotional and physical abuse during our marriage. She requested 10% of our shared assets and a divorce, claiming spousal abuse as the grounds, aiming to sway the judgment in Emily's favor. Heather, seated next to me, barely stifled a laugh. Heather rose and addressed the court, explaining that there had been no mediation because of Emily's actions. She agreed to let Ms. Bradford present her case first, as long as she had the opportunity to cross-examine the witnesses. The judge nodded in approval. Then Heather outlined our case, emphasizing that Emily's lies were a deliberate attempt to destroy my career, relationships, and reputation. She detailed how Emily's actions had led to the loss of my job and had strained my friendships and family ties. With firm conviction, Heather stated there had been no abuse, and we would prove it beyond doubt. When Emily took the stand, I kept my eyes fixed ahead, refusing to meet hers. Her lawyer questioned her about our relationship, and she painted me as a controlling husband who couldn't stand her working night shifts. She claimed I had grown suspicious and accused her of having affairs with doctors. Fighting back tears, she told the court how I allegedly hit her, forcing her to hide bruises with makeup, and that she sought refuge at her sister's home, where Jessica took photos of the injuries for the divorce proceedings. Then, Emily admitted to her affair with Luke, explaining that he had been kind and supportive, helping her feel whole while she was being bullied by me. The lawyer skillfully walked her through every detail of their affair, right up to the night of our anniversary dinner. She claimed that I had threatened to rip her engagement ring off her finger and to break Luke's hands. Emily insisted my anger terrified her and that she only wanted the engagement ring back as a keepsake. Her lawyer smirked triumphantly as she recounted how devastated Emily had been to find her clothes ruined and her wedding dress burned. Next, her sister Jessica, Rachel, and finally Luke took the stand, all testifying against me, painting me as an abusive husband. Jessica confirmed she had taken pictures of Emily's bruises, which made Heather smile knowingly. By the time Luke finished testifying, it was late in the day, and the judge called for a recess. As we left the courtroom, Sandra voiced what everyone was thinking. "I've never heard such disgusting lies," she exclaimed, hugging me tightly, with my other supporters surrounding me. My parents, sitting with Emily's side, shot daggers at me, their loyalty clearly with her. The next morning, Heather began her cross-examination, addressing Emily by her maiden name, Reeves. She started by asking about Emily's relationship with Luke and if the affair had unfolded the way she claimed. Emily blushed, nodding in agreement. Then Heather pulled out a recording from our anniversary dinner, where Emily could be heard telling me, "You've been the best husband anyone could ask for." The courtroom went silent. Heather asked pointedly, "Are those the words of an abused wife?" Flustered, Emily tried to backtrack, claiming she was just trying to show she cared, even though she secretly resented me for bullying her. Heather pressed further, pointing out how Emily had acted like a loving wife while plotting with Luke behind my back. Heather played another recording, this one from the night I found out about her affair. "Robert, the man I danced with is Luke Heller, my first and only love," Emily's voice echoed in the courtroom. A collective gasp filled the room as Emily admitted to having loved Luke throughout our entire marriage. She confessed that her feelings for Luke were why she had refused to have children, knowing she would eventually leave me for him. Heather wasn't finished. She presented surveillance footage of Emily outside our home and reservation records from hotels where she stayed with Luke, directly contradicting her claims of being at her sister's house. The video showed her arriving at multiple hotels with Luke on nights she had told me she was away for family visits. Heather went in for the final blow. "Where are the bruises, Ms. Reeves?" she asked, displaying footage of Emily in public, not a mark on her. "You've been lying this whole time, haven't you? This wasn't a case of a woman saved from abuse. You were an equal partner in this deception with Luke Heller." Emily's face drained of color, and she shot a venomous glare at Heather. But Heather wasn't fazed. She grew more intense, turning to the financial aspect. "Now, let's discuss the financial story you've spun for this court. According to your agreement with Mr. Carson, both of you were supposed to contribute to a joint account. But that's not quite accurate, is it? You hid a significant portion of your income from him, preparing for the day you might leave him." She hit a button, and Emily's hidden bank statements were projected onto the screen. They showed large deposits she had been hoarding, along with payments from her job she had never disclosed. Heather chuckled softly. You claim to be a nurse uninterested in promotions, but you're actually the third most senior nurse at the hospital, making nearly 4 times what you told Mr. Carson. Heather wasn't done. And what about the bonds we found in your name? These bonds belong to Mr. Carson, yet they were found in your safety deposit box. You've been siphoning money for years, Emily stammered, trying to regain her composure. I was protecting myself from his abuse, she muttered. Heather didn't buy it. These are verifiable facts, Ms. Reeves. They prove you've been lying to this court and to your husband. And now you're asking for your wedding ring back? A ring that belonged to Mr. Carson's family? What does an adulteress need with a reminder of the good man she deceived? In a rare moment of defiance, Emily fired back, I love that ring. It meant everything to me, especially after he burned my wedding dress. But Heather had already made her point. The gallery erupted into muffled laughter, and the judge called for order. Heather's job was done. The truth had been laid bare for all to see. I want it back, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Heather pressed another button, and a picture of Luke Heller and Emily at a hospital event, taken 9 months before our marriage ended, flashed on the screen. In the photo, Emily was proudly displaying a new engagement ring. Heather's tone turned cold and sharp. The newspaper beautifully described the event, didn't it? Mr. Heller proudly showed off the unique engagement ring he gave his fiancée. That ring is strikingly similar to the one Mr. Carson mistakenly gave to a woman claiming to be his fiancée. Isn't that right? Emily sat there, speechless, as Heather continued. It was all just a show, wasn't it? A performance to make Heller look committed, securing a doctor's wife to boost his career. He'll keep you around as long as it benefits him. Once you're no longer useful, he'll toss you aside. Just like he planned. Heather's words cut deep. Emily looked down, her defenses crumbling. Still upset over the dress, Heather added, Did you plan to wear your wedding dress when Heller marries you? Emily's response was barely a whisper. No, she said, but the tears followed. The gallery murmured as her lies began to unravel in front of everyone. Heather wasn't finished. She turned to Rachel, who had stood by Emily's side the entire time. Rachel, Heather began calmly, how long have you known about Emily's affair? Rachel's face went pale. The affair wasn't with James, she stammered. Emily has always been with Luke. Heather smiled, a cutting edge to her expression. Then why lie for her? I didn't lie, Rachel said shakily. I just repeated what I was told. Heather's relentless questioning broke through Rachel's defenses, exposing her for the role she played in Emily's deceit. By the end, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that Emily's entire story was collapsing. Heather asked one final question. Have you ever actually seen the bruises Emily claimed she had? Rachel hesitated, then finally admitted, no, she was just so upset, and I believed her. Despite further questions, Rachel wouldn't admit to being fooled, standing by her friend as long as she could. But Heather pressed on. Do you know how to tell the truth? Or is deception your specialty too? How many boyfriends have you had? Rachel? Are you planning to pull the same stunt with your husband when something better comes along? Rachel was stunned. I love my husband. I'd never do that. Heather hit another button, displaying a video of Rachel with her husband, David, leaving a room to meet Emily and Luke. Rachel collapsed against the stand, fainting from the pressure. From the gallery, Amy Grant yelled, You damn liar, before storming out. It seemed David and Grant were about to discover the truth of what had been going on. Heather turned to the judge. Your Honor, may I call another witness before cross-examining Luke Heller? Their testimony will clarify things for the court. The judge agreed. As I learned later from Bill, Heller had nearly suffered a heart attack when Heather called her next witness, Samantha Wiseman. A woman I had never seen before stepped up to the podium. She looked flawless, as if she had just walked off a movie set. Heather smiled. Ms. Wiseman, could you please tell the court what your profession is? Samantha answered cautiously. I work in theater, film, and television. My specialty is creating textural effects and using makeup to enhance performances. Think of street artists who create illusions like giant holes in the road or trains bursting through walls. I make people look like that. Heather nodded. Do you know Luke Heller? Samantha replied carefully. Yes, I met him in Bristol. My son, Alan, had a benign brain tumor, and Mr. Heller performed the surgery. It was successful. That was about 8 years ago. Heather pressed on. How did Mr. Heller learn about your skills? Samantha explained. After the surgery, Alan had motor skill issues. I helped him regain control of his arm and hand by teaching him to sculpt monsters out of clay. Mr. Heller walked in one day and was fascinated by what I was doing. And did things go beyond that? Heather asked. Yes, Samantha admitted. It was around Halloween, and he asked me to do his makeup for a party. He wanted to look like an abusive spouse because his friends said he was too serious and never got a joke. He claimed his reputation was unfair, and he thought this would prove everyone wrong. I did his makeup for 3 parties that year. Every time, the bruises were a different shade. Heather's voice was sharp now. How many times have you done this for him? 3 more times since then, spaced out over the years, Samantha replied. Heather's next question cut through the tension. Besides Mr. Heller, do you know anyone else in this courtroom? Samantha hesitated before replying. Yes, Emily and Rachel. I did their makeup for a few parties in Liverpool last year. They said their husbands would never touch them, but they were curious to see how their friends would react. Heather pressed another button, and images of Emily and Rachel appeared on the screen, showcasing Samantha's makeup artistry. The photos showed the entire process, from untouched skin to bruised faces, so convincing that even I thought I had struck Emily. She's incredibly talented, Heather commented dryly. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Samantha's testimony and the photographic evidence left no doubt. Emily's entire narrative about being abused was fabricated, carefully crafted with the help of Samantha's makeup skills to create fake bruises for sympathy and manipulation. Heather's relentless approach had torn apart Emily's web of deceit, leaving nothing but the truth for everyone to see. The lies, once so carefully constructed, were now nothing more than ashes, just like the wedding dress Emily had claimed to cherish. I almost laughed when I realized the photos Emily had shown in court were the same ones Samantha had created. Heather's voice was steady as she asked, So, all those photos are of your work, and none of the bruises are real? Samantha nodded, looking stunned. When they arrived, they were spotless. When they left, they looked like they had been beaten. Heather continued, Did you know what your work would be used for? Samantha was visibly shocked. No, I'd never be part of something like that. If I had known, I would have come forward sooner. Heather simply replied, Thank you. Emily's lawyer, Ms. Bradford, had no questions. She sat there, shocked and defeated, as if the case was nearing its end. The judge, humming in approval, seemed ready to bring the trial to a close, but Heather wasn't done yet. As Luke Heller began his testimony, 2 men entered the courtroom, their eyes fixed only on him. Heller's expression darkened. I kept my gaze locked on him, eager to watch Heather dismantle his lies. The smile I had practiced for this moment revealed just how much I looked forward to seeing his downfall. Heather began, Mr. Heller, you had an affair with Ms. Reeves before she married Mr. Carson, didn't you? With an air of arrogance, Heller responded, No, I only stepped in to help her. Heather was relentless, picking apart his lies piece by piece. His arrogance was sickening, as he continually bragged about his achievements. But Heather had him cornered, and the trap was about to spring shut. Heather grinned as she asked, Yesterday, you claimed you became physically involved with Ms. Reeves only after her husband attacked her. But today, I've presented the court with years of evidence showing your secret meetings in hotels, some lasting for days. She even laughed at your clumsy attempts to seduce her, didn't she? Furious, Heller snapped, No, we only became involved recently. Heather didn't let up. Hotel staff often complained about the noise coming from your room, the moaning and screams during your physical encounters. Were the hotel staff lying? Heller's face flushed as Heather listed the numerous complaints. Her smile widened as she added, And there's more about your behavior. As Heather started to conclude, she laid it all out for the court. You've lied to cover up your affair with a married woman. You've lied to your employers, claiming all of this is fabricated. Are you even truly a surgeon? Or is that another lie? Growing angrier by the second, Heller shouted, "I am a surgeon, one of the best." Heather laughed. "You may be skilled with a scalpel, but as a human being, you're despicable." She pressed a button, and photos of Heller's past abusive relationships appeared on the screen. Accompanying letters revealed how he had manipulated 4 different courts into granting him financial settlements from women he had deceived, like Betsy, whom he had pretended to befriend. Heather scrolled through even more incriminating evidence. The courtroom watched in disbelief as Heller's pattern of manipulation and deceit became clear. Heather continued, "These records suggest you orchestrated these schemes as revenge against women who rejected you. Isn't that true?" Heller sat in silence, visibly uncomfortable. Sensing her advantage, Heather leaned in, her voice sharpening. "Your colleagues were right about you. You can't handle women standing up to you. You pursued them for their property and then persecuted them when they said no. You lied in court, didn't you?" Heller's face turned a deep shade of red, but he stayed silent. Heather leaned closer. "You're nothing but a small man, in every sense of the word, Mr. Heller." His outburst didn't escape the judge's notice. Heather almost laughed when Heller snapped, "You're a bloody witch." Unfazed, Heather pressed on. "You've lied your way through this entire case, and now the truth is out. Your arrogance is crumbling, and you know what's coming next." She gestured toward the 2 men sitting in the courtroom. "Do you know who they are?" Heller's eyes widened as he glanced at them, panic flashing across his face. Heather smirked. "They're here to arrest you." But she wasn't done. "You didn't just lie about your relationships, you plotted to destroy people's lives." "Let's talk about Emily now." She displayed records of Heller's meetings with Emily, their correspondence, and their scheming. "You denied communicating with her during this time, didn't you?" Heller stammered. "We weren't." Heather cut him off. "But here's a detailed plan where you conspired to accuse Mr. Carson of attacking Emily. You created this plan to ruin an innocent man's life." At this, sobs echoed from the gallery as Emily's lies were fully exposed. The tension in the room was palpable. Heather pressed on, relentless. "You were planning to destroy him, weren't you? His career, his marriage, everything. You thought there would be no consequences." Visibly shaken, Heller tried to downplay it. "It was just talk. We weren't really going to go through with it." Heather, incredulous, fired back. "But you did. You set it all in motion. You manipulated Ms. Bradford into bringing this case to court, thinking you'd walk away untouched." Heather paused dramatically, allowing the tension to build before delivering her final blow. "But you weren't planning to stop there, were you, Mr. Heller? You had already set your sights on your next scheme, another attempt to swindle money." Heller's face tightened, but he denied it. The strain was visible in his eyes as they flicked between the 2 officers waiting nearby and Emily, who sat in a state of disbelief, her face pale and tear-streaked. Heather, sensing that victory was near, turned to the gallery. "Let's move on to the last piece of evidence." With a few taps on her laptop, a new document appeared on the screen, and the entire courtroom collectively gasped. It was Heller's detailed plan to sue Emily for her assets. A gut-wrenching sob erupted from Emily as she read the cold, calculated betrayal in front of her. Her cries grew louder when the plan revealed Heller's intent to marry her, only to discard her once he'd gotten what he wanted, her money and the boost to his career. Heather looked back to the court. This so-called doctor has spent years manipulating the legal system, lying to courts, and preying on women to secure financial gains. Now, Sheriff Griffith from Hamilton has issued a warrant for his arrest. She nodded to the 2 officers, who stepped forward. "These officers are here to execute that warrant on behalf of his victims." Heller went pale, his confidence crumbling as the officers approached. Heather added, "This morning, I also secured a court order freezing all of your assets. Everything you own is locked down." She locked eyes with him. "I'm sure Ms. Reeves now understands what she threw away. The good man she betrayed for someone like you." The officers snapped the cuffs onto Heller's wrists and led him out of the courtroom. The room fell into stunned silence. Heather turned to the judge, signaling that her work was done, then turned to face me. "Mr. Carson, it's time for you to speak." I took a deep breath, still trying to process everything that had been uncovered. Standing at the witness stand, I recounted my marriage, the deception, and the betrayal. My voice was strained, the weight of everything settling in as I relived it. I didn't see it coming, I said, fighting back emotion. Everything just fell apart in a matter of days. My job, my family, my friends, they all believed the lies. They thought I was abusive. Heather gave me a supportive nod. And how has this affected your life? I looked down, my voice barely above a whisper. It's taken everything. I lost my job, my reputation, my self-respect. My parents chose to believe the lies, and I lost friends who turned their backs on me. The judge, visibly moved, gave his closing statement. Mr. Carson, you've been exonerated of all wrongdoing. This case represents a gross miscarriage of justice that could have ruined your life if the truth hadn't been revealed. You deserve a future with someone who values honesty and integrity. The case was officially closed. The room filled with tears and embraces. Jim hugged me tightly, then turned to thank Heather. My friends Bill and Sandra came over, offering their support. As I glanced toward the back of the courtroom, I saw my mother in tears, the gravity of everything that had been lost finally sinking in for her. She had believed the lies, and now the truth had come out, too late to undo the damage. The years with her grandchildren were gone, cut short by Emily's deception. The next day, my marriage was officially dissolved. The judge ordered Emily to repay all the money she had spent during her affair, including her car expenses, and contribute back to our joint account. The total settlement came to £22,500, with an additional order for her to pay me £675 a month until I secured a job matching my previous salary. Heather's team had laid out everything so thoroughly that there wasn't a single hole in the case. Emily, now a shadow of her former self, sat quietly, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Not even Samantha's expert makeup skills could hide the toll that the courtroom defeat had taken on her. The judge warned her sternly that her suspended sentence could become active if she failed to pay the fines on time. Emily was fined £5,000, and Rachel and Samantha were each fined £1,000 for their roles in the deception. Heather didn't stop there. She moved swiftly to have Heller removed from the medical register, taking the case to the General Medical Council. Meanwhile, Jim received a call from Hamilton Court. The sheriff had taken Heller into custody. It was clear that Heller would face serious consequences, including the return of stolen funds from the women he had manipulated. If he failed to deposit the money into the court, he'd be looking at an even longer prison sentence. Heather was also planning to raise a red flag with the nursing board regarding Emily's behavior, though she acknowledged it might not lead to immediate consequences. However, it would remain on record and could affect Emily's future employment prospects. As I tried to process the whirlwind of revelations, Heather advised me to remain patient regarding child support payments and to focus on finding a new job. Jim leaned over quietly and surprised me by saying, "You know, Sandra seems to have a real soft spot for you. Every time I talk to her, she's kind and thoughtful. Maybe you two could help each other through this mess." Jim's voice softened as he added, "You should think about seeing a counselor. You've been putting on a brave face, but we all see it. You're hurting. A lot. No one's buying the act. Talking to someone might help you work through it all and find some peace." Heather nodded in agreement. "You've endured more than most could handle, James. It's time to focus on healing and rebuilding. You deserve happiness, and it's out there waiting for you. I've seen a lot over the years, but your story, that's one for the books, maybe even a movie," Heather said, a knowing smile on her face. "You're a good, decent man. Now, let's work on getting that man back, building a life that'll prove them all wrong." As we parted, her final words made me chuckle. "Oh, and if you think the judge went easy on Emily by not throwing her in jail, think again. My bill will hit her for about £24,000. Yours will be lower, since you helped Betsy so much, but Emily won't know that." Later that evening, my brother Dan dropped by. He looked exhausted, worn out from sleepless nights with his new baby. He and his wife had decided to go for a third child because he was hoping for a son, and now he finally had one. Our parents hadn't even met the little guy yet. Dan, despite his exhaustion, looked genuinely happy for me. "Hey, if you're looking for work, I can set you up with a night shift gig. Not glamorous, But it's something, he offered. I thanked him but declined. I didn't have much experience in that field. As he wrapped an arm around my shoulder, he said, "Don't worry, James. You'll find the right person. You'll have the family you want. Just be prepared for the first time you have to deal with a dirty diaper." He laughed as he headed out the door. Later that night, Sandra, Josie, Michaela, Bill, and a few others came over for drinks to celebrate. It was the first time in a long while that I felt like myself, letting loose and enjoying some laughs. Josie surprised me by pulling me onto the dance floor, grinning as she leaned closer. "You should take a chance with Sandra," she said, her eyes twinkling. "She's always had feelings for you. You two would make a great match. And hey, if not, Michaela or I will scoop you up." She laughed as she jokingly acted like I'd stepped on her foot and waddled away dramatically. Sandra was the last to leave that night. She stood at the door for a moment, then said quietly, "James, I meant what I told you before. If you ever need anything, I'll be there for you." I still mean it. I wish I could have been the woman you needed back then. Maybe things would have turned out differently between us. She hesitated, glancing down, then added, "You're a good man. You deserve to find that love you've been searching for. You're great with other people's kids. You'd be an amazing dad." Her voice softened as she continued, "Maybe we can help each other out. I was too young back then, didn't know myself well enough to give you what you needed. You were my first love, James, not just some crush. Jim's right. We should both go see a counselor. Maybe figure out who we are now and where this could go." Sandra smiled gently. "If we do this, it's because I want to be with you, not just as friends, but as partners. And maybe someday as a mother too." 2 days later, the local newspaper hit the stands, and there I was, front and center. The article laid out the entire story, how they had tried to frame me, the courtroom drama, the truth finally revealed. There wasn't a single comment online defending Emily. People were ruthless about her fate, with some saying things that honestly unsettled me. About 8 weeks after the trial, Heather sent me an email with updates. She had filed detailed letters with the General Medical Council, the General Board of Nursing, and the leadership at Cary Evangelical Church. She didn't hold back, exposing Heller's lies and demanding that his medical registration be suspended immediately. At his third hearing, despite paying back over £250,000 to his victims, Sheriff Griffith sentenced him to 5 years in prison. Heather made sure Samantha Wiseman's testimony and photographs were front and center in the prosecution's case. Heller pled guilty on the first day of his plea hearing, which earned him a reduced sentence. The sheriff cited an earlier ruling from the Court of Appeal, noting that Heller could have faced 7.5 years if the case had gone to the High Court. Heller's disgrace made national headlines. The Sunday papers tore him apart. Reporters approached me for comment, but I declined, saying I was still too emotionally raw to speak publicly about Emily's betrayal. Meanwhile, Heather's letter to Cary Evangelical Church raised serious doubts about Emily's sister, Jessica, and her fitness for leadership roles. Heather pointed out how Jessica had lied under oath, violating the very commandment she had sworn to uphold. I had my doubts about how her marriage would survive that, considering how devout her husband was. Word got around that Brian and Rachel had split, and Amy and Grant were also done. Even Sarah and Mark, who had always seemed rock solid, were having issues, mostly due to Sarah's involvement with the others, which had led Mark to grow suspicious. At least I had a small victory. My golf game improved by 15 yards whenever I imagined the ball being one of their heads. As for Emily, I couldn't care less. Karma had found its target. Sandra and I had been seeing 2 therapists for over 3 months now. It wasn't easy, but we were sticking together, helping each other through the hard days. Sandra had shared more with me than ever before, especially about her relationship with her mother, which had been much worse than I ever realized. Sharon, our therapist, helped us dig into the past, uncovering layers of pain that had been buried for years. There was a night where Sandra hugged me as I cried, something I hadn't done in years. We talked about my feelings regarding Emily, the marriage, and how it had all gone so wrong. What broke me wasn't just the betrayal. It was how far Emily was willing to go to destroy me. The woman I'd loved for years had turned into someone unrecognizable, and in the process, I lost who I was too. Sarah, my therapist, helped me realize that I'd been turning all that anger inward, punishing myself for something that wasn't my fault. She encouraged me to write it all down, saying, "If you could look at this situation the way you would an engineering problem, you'd see it more clearly." She was right. Maybe writing it all out was what I needed. To see the pieces laid out in front of me, to understand how I could start putting myself back together. I've finally come to terms with it. It wasn't my fault. It was two deceitful people who schemed behind my back. I played no part in what they did. I was the good guy all along, and now I can finally see that. Sandra and Sharon both helped me realize this, and that's what led me to write this article. Sandra, being her persuasive self, even offered me a reward if I finished it. After reading through it several times, I finally believe it. None of this was my doing. There was no way I could have predicted what Emily and Heller were plotting. We had what I thought was a perfect marriage, almost no arguments. Sure, maybe I was too trusting, believing she really loved me, but that's not a fault. There was nothing I could have done to stop them. The one thing I know for sure now is that I ruined their plans more than they ruined mine. After finishing the article, I called Sandra to tell her. She said she'd come over soon. I'm not sure what the reward is going to be, but she's an amazing baker, and she's been teasing me about some scones. And let me tell you, I love scones. Sandra and I have been spending a lot of time together lately, finding every opportunity to meet up. Whether it's cuddling during movies or hanging out at her place, we make time whenever we can. We have long conversations, and we laugh about how we share some interests but not others. For example, she calls golf a good walk ruined, but that's okay. We don't have to like everything the same. A few weeks ago, during one of her sessions with Sharon, Sandra opened up about her love for kids and how she hopes to have some of her own one day. Sharon has been guiding her through that, and I've seen the changes. Maybe Sandra is seeing a future for us that includes that dream. Later that evening, there was a knock at the door. It was Sandra. She looked nervous, like something was weighing on her. I took her coat, and she gave me a strange look, her lips pressed tight in that way she does when she's stressed. She seemed terrified, but after a deep sigh, she shrugged and slowly removed her coat. "I've been doing what Sharon suggested to prepare, but I'm scared," she admitted quietly. I led her into the living room and sat beside her. "Sandra, you don't have to do anything you're not ready for." She shook her head. "I want to, James. This is the first step for me, toward being more than just a friend to you. What else could I do?" 2 weeks later, my life took another turn. This time, for the better. I had landed a new job with a competitor of my old firm, and they offered me more than my previous salary. The guy who hired me, Neil Davidson, seemed like a solid, down-to-earth person. During the interview, I could tell he'd been through his own struggles, and it was clear he understood mine. But that didn't mean he was easy on me. He thoroughly tested my engineering skills before making the offer. Sandra and I celebrated that weekend with a trip to a roller coaster park in Staffordshire. It was her first time on one, and she screamed through the entire ride, but she absolutely loved it. I had booked a room with twin beds, and when we got there, she seemed quiet, lost in thought. After 2 sessions with Sharon that week, something was clearly on her mind. But when I picked her up and danced with her, full of excitement about my new job and, more importantly, having her in my life, her worries seemed to melt away. That same night, I proposed to her. We toasted to the future, filled with hope and joy. As we danced, she asked, "We'll have time to figure everything out, but is there anything we should talk about now?" I paused, looking around the room. "Where are we going to live? I mean, this place has a lot of history. You might not want to stay here." Sandra laughed, her smile softening. "I'll live anywhere with you, James. This place has charm. I remember coming here when you visited your grandparents. The love in this house made it special, and we'll make our own memories here. For bedrooms, plenty of room for kids someday. Sure, I'd change some of the colors, maybe plant a vegetable garden and some herbs in the backyard, but it's perfect. No reason to move to one of those new homes that feel like rabbit holes." I smiled, nodding. "And the wedding? Are you planning the perfect big day?" Sandra seemed surprised. "Big wedding? No, not for me. I've never wanted that. It'll be small. Just my mom, my sister, and her family. A few close friends, maybe 5. 2 of them will pretend to be mad I stole you from them." She chuckled. You've got your friends like Bill, Gordon, and of course your brother Dan and his family. I could feel her studying me closely as she continued. I know you don't talk much about your parents, and I get that you feel betrayed by them. But I do worry that our kids won't have grandparents around to spoil them. Her voice softened. My dad passed away young, and my mom's not in the best health, but she'll be a wonderful grandmother. I know you're torn about your parents, but it's your choice. I'll support you either way. I nodded quietly, thinking about it all.